Good morning. This is Ruth chapter 3, video 11. And today we need to talk about some background information before we get too far into this. Now, most of us have always heard about the story of Ruth, how that Ruth comes back from Moab with her mother-in-law, Naomi, and that she marries back into the family, and everything goes happy, 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 happy. Well, there has been some misconceptions in the past. Now, you might not have had it, but I have had them before and have been taught certain things with this story. In the book of Ruth, chapter 3, Naomi encourages Ruth to go and have a kind of a rendezvous or a date with Boaz down at the threshing floor. Well, we've got several things going on here. First thing is the threshing floor. This is where the bundles of wheat, bundles of barley are brought in, and the heads of grain are separated from the stalk. The stalk is then taken out and burned. The heads of grain then will go through a process of which will remove the husk, and this is part of the threshing operation. It will remove the husk, which is a hard covering above the seed or the grain, and then the grain is, after the husk is broken and removed, they do a winnowing process in which they throw it up in the air, and the wind blows the chaff away, and when it does that, the seeds fall back to the ground. Now, that's all that you want, is just the very seed, the kernel of grain, regardless of what kind it is. This is usually done well after the harvest. This is a time in which you've got a little bit of space there. You've gotten it out of the field and things like this. Well, Naomi sends Ruth down to the threshing floor to kind of force the hand with Boaz. She is saying in chapter 3, one day Naomi, her mother-in-law, said to her, "My daughter, should I not try to find a home for you where you will be well provided for? Is not Boaz, with whose servant girls you have been a kinsman of ours?" Now, he's not a kinsman redeemer yet. She calls him a kinsman. And just because he's a kinsman does not necessarily make him the kinsman redeemer. It's the closest to the family. And a kinsman redeemer has a different job or a different prospect of what happens within the family. So she says, tonight he will be winnowing barley on the threshing floor. Well, the kinsman redeemer and the Leverite marriage are completely different. A lot of people think this has to do with the Leverite marriage, that he is the next of kin, that is to marry the widow of Mahlon, Ruth's husband. This is not true. Okay, the next of kin, according to according to Deuteronomy 25, 5 and 6, That's the book of Deuteronomy. Look at chapter 25, 5 and 6. If brothers are living together and one of them dies without a son, his widow must not marry outside the family. Her husband's brother shall take her and marry her and fulfill the duty of a brother-in-law. The first son she bears shall carry on the name of the dead brother, so that his name will not be blotted out from Israel. This Leverite marriage has to do with brothers, not cousins, not uncles, not second and third and fourth cousins. It has to do with brothers. Now, the most famous story is back in Genesis chapter 38, where let's go there for just a second. Genesis chapter 38, where Judah and Tamar. Judah, you remember, is one of the 12 tribes, one of the 12 brothers, and he had three sons, and the first one married, and he died without having children, so he gave it the daughter-in-law, Tamar, to the second son, and he died without having any children. And the third son was yet too young to marry, and so the daddy didn't give him to her yet. But when she found out he was old enough to marry and they hadn't given to him, she played a trick on her father-in-law and she got pregnant by him. Well, this is within the Levite marriage, not the baby that was born to Tamar and Judah, but that the wife would be carried on. This is different from a kinsman redeemer. And so we'll need to look at what's going on with that. If you will remember back just for a moment on the various laws, the first law that we had encountered was in Leviticus chapter 19, verse 9. When you reap the harvest of your land, do not reap to the very edges of the field or gather the gleanings. Well, the gleanings is what Ruth is out there gathering. She's destitute. Her mother-in-law has no money. They live in Bethlehem. She's going to the fields for about 3 months now. She's gone for 50 days into the field every day except the Sabbath to glean. That is, to pick up the grain that is left behind. And then my question is always, whenever we talk about the corners of your field and things like this that you leave for the poor, how big is your corner? What do you give to the poor? Today we don't do this, even the people that have wheat land, but we're in America. Do they do that in Israel? Check it out. Okay, now the next thing that we need to talk about is in Deuteronomy chapter 24, verse 19, when you are harvesting in your field and you overlook a sheaf, do not go back to get it. Leave it for the alien, the fatherless, and the widow, so that the Lord your God may bless you in all the work of your hands. So here we have another incident in which it tells us what the laws of leaving for the poor, the laws of gleaning and leaving things for the crop for the poor. There's another scripture that tells us that when you go through your field and you reap your grapes from the grapevines, you only go through them one time. You don't go back and go back and go back and get everything that you possibly can. You go through it one time. Leave it for the alien. Leave things for the alien, for the homeless, for the widow, for travelers to eat. When you go through your orchard and pick the apples, go through them one time and pick the ripe apples. When you go through the olive groves, pick them one time, beat them off the limbs one time. Don't go there constantly, and make sure that you get every last one of them. How big is what you leave for the traveler, for the widow, for the orphan, for the poor? How big is how much you leave? Those are questions. And so this is different. This is the laws of gleaning, and the laws of gleaning are uh, what we're concerned with in that is happening in the book of Ruth.